morning I signed the papers to put my brother in handcuffs, I was wearing the same cardigan I'd had on when he tried to have me declared legally dead. I want you to hold that for a second. Not dead from an illness. Not dead from an illness. Not dead from an accident. Declared dead on paper, through a notary, in an office on Maple Street, while I was still breathing in a hospital bed 12 miles away. My brother Ezra had been planning this for longer than I knew. That's the part that still gets me when I lie awake at night. Not the betrayal itself. I'd seen glimpses of who he was for years and kept explaining them away. But the timeline, the sheer amount of time and patience it took to set up what he did. You don't improvise something like that. You build it, quietly, while you're sitting across from someone at Thanksgiving passing the rolls, asking how work is going. He was 34 when all of this happened. I was 29. Our parents had been gone for 6 years by then. Dad first, then Mom 18 months later, like she'd just decided she didn't want to be here without him. We'd inherited the house and a life insurance payout split evenly between us. Ezra burned through his half in under 2 years. I didn't ask questions. I told myself it wasn't my business. I should have asked questions. I should have asked a lot of questions. Our grandmother had a saying she repeated so often it lost all meaning while she was alive and only started making sense after she died. She used to say, "The wolf doesn't announce itself. It just waits for you to leave the door open." I left every door wide open. I've been dealing with a health condition for most of my adult life, an autoimmune disorder that would flare up without warning, put me down for days, sometimes longer. Most of the time, it was manageable. I had a good doctor, a treatment plan, a routine. But that January, something shifted. I woke up one morning and I genuinely couldn't feel my hands. Not numb from cold, just gone. By the afternoon, I could barely stand. My neighbor drove me to the ER because I couldn't reach anyone else, and I didn't want to call Ezra over something that might turn out to be nothing. It turned out to be something. The doctors admitted me that evening. Possible flare, possible secondary complication. They needed to run tests. I was in no state to make decisions. The nurse asked me if there was anyone they should contact, and I gave her Ezra's number because he was the only family I had. He showed up that first night looking genuinely worried, pale, tired, asking all the right questions. He held my hand for a few minutes. He told me not to stress, that he'd handle things, that I just needed to focus on getting better. He asked, almost as an afterthought, if I had my insurance card with me or if he should find it at my apartment. I told him where I kept my spare key. I told him my insurance was through my employer. All the documents were in the blue folder on my desk. I said thank you. 3 days later, I was still in the hospital, slightly improved, still being monitored. My Dr. Reyes, came in during her rounds and mentioned, gently but directly, that a man had called the nurse's station twice asking for updates on my condition. The second time he'd asked whether there had been any changes. Dr. Reyes said the phrasing struck her as odd. She'd flagged it with the charge nurse. I told her it was probably just my brother being anxious. She nodded. She said she understood. And then she said, "We're going to note in your chart that no information is to be released to outside parties without your explicit written consent going forward. Just as a precaution, I hope that's okay." I said that was fine. I had no idea she'd just potentially saved my life. What I didn't know, lying in that hospital bed watching daytime television and eating terrible Jell-O, was that Ezra had been at my apartment for 2 days. He'd gone through the blue folder. He'd gone through every folder. He'd found my life insurance policy, the one through my job, with a payout that would cover a lot of his problems, and he'd found the original deed to Mom and Dad's house, which I'd kept in my name after we'd agreed I would manage it. He'd also found the name of my estate attorney. I'd set up a basic will when I was 25 because my doctor had recommended it given my health history. Nothing elaborate. My assets would go to 2 close friends and a small animal rescue I'd been donating to for years. Ezra was not in the will. He knew this because I told him directly 2 years earlier when he'd asked. He had not taken it well then. I'd thought he'd moved on. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. What he did next, I still have trouble saying out loud. He contacted a notary, a woman he'd apparently found through a guy he knew, someone who operated in the gray spaces of legal work, and he told her I had been hospitalized and was not expected to recover. He had documents drafted that would establish him as the sole beneficiary of my estate. He claimed I had signed a power of attorney document giving him authority to act on my behalf. There was no such document. He had forged it. He walked into that notary's office on a Wednesday afternoon with a folder full of forged paperwork and a story about a grieving brother trying to get his sister's affairs in order before it was too late. The notary stamped it. I was eating jello. Here's what Ezra didn't count on. He didn't count on Dr. Reyes. He didn't count on the fact that I'd mentioned to my friend Tobias, one of the people named in my actual will, that Ezra had been calling the hospital and that Tobias had thought that was strange enough to reach out to my estate attorney himself. And he didn't count on the hospital's patient advocate, a woman named Ms. Perkins, who had worked in that department for 16 years and had, in her words, seen every version of this story. When Ezra showed up at the hospital on day 4, not to check on me but to ask the front desk to help him arrange transfer of my vehicle, which he claimed I had verbally authorized, Miss Perkins was the one who intercepted him. She was the one who quietly pulled security. She was the one who asked him to wait in a small room off the main corridor while she got the paperwork sorted. She was also the one who called the police. I didn't know any of this was happening. I was asleep. I'd had a procedure that morning and the medication had knocked me out completely. I missed the whole thing. The first I heard about it was when a detective came into my room that afternoon, introduced himself, and asked if I'd authorized anyone to act on my behalf during my hospitalization. I said no. He showed me a copy of the forged power of attorney. I stared at my brother's handwriting on a document I had never seen in my life, and something in my chest went very, very cold. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think people assume that once the police are involved, everything moves fast and clean. It doesn't. It moved slowly. It moved with a lot of paperwork and a lot of waiting and a lot of moments where I sat in rooms and answered questions and tried to hold myself together while someone across a desk explained to me in careful legal language exactly how comprehensively my brother had tried to dismantle my life. The forged POA had already been used. He had contacted my insurance company, he had spoken to a representative and attempted to initiate a claim, telling them I had died. The insurance company had a verification process, thank God. They required a certified death certificate before releasing any funds, and the claim had been flagged as pending. But he had tried. He had looked up what he needed, prepared a story, picked up the phone, and tried. He had also changed the forwarding address on my bank account statements to a P.O. box he controlled. When the detective explained that last part, I had to ask him to repeat it. Not because I hadn't heard him, because I needed a moment to understand that my brother had been doing this while calling me every few days to ask how I was feeling, while texting me articles about my condition, while performing, with what I can only describe as stunning accuracy, the role of a concerned sibling. My attorney, who I want to be very clear I had never been more grateful for in my life, moved quickly once she understood the scope of it. The notarized documents were invalidated. The insurance claim was formally blocked. A fraud complaint was filed with the state. And because of the forged POA and the attempted insurance fraud, Ezra was looking at felony charges. He was arrested at the apartment of the woman he'd been staying with. I didn't even know her name on a Thursday morning, about 11 days after I'd first been admitted to the hospital. I was home by then, still recovering, still exhausted, sitting on my couch in the same cardigan because I hadn't had the energy to change. My phone buzzed. It was the detective. He said, "We have him." 3 words. I put the phone down and I sat there for a long time without moving. People ask me, when I tell this story, whether I felt guilty, whether some part of me wanted to pull it back, pick up the phone, make it stop. He's your brother, they say. He's the only family you have left. I understand why people ask. I do. I've asked myself the same question in the dark at 3 in the morning more times than I can count. But here's what I keep coming back to. Ezra didn't make a desperate, panicked mistake. He didn't act in a moment of crisis and immediately regret it. He planned this. He built it piece by piece over days. He sat with me in that hospital room and looked me in the eyes and then drove across town to an office to file paperwork designed to steal everything I had, built on the assumption that I would not survive. He was counting on me to die. That's not someone who got scared and made a terrible choice. That's someone who looked at me and did the math and decided I was worth more to him gone than here. So, no, I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I finally understood something I'd been refusing to see for a very long time. There's a thing that happens after something like this that no one really prepares you for. You don't just heal from the medical part and move on. You have to go back through your entire memory of a person and re examine everything. Every kindness you remember, was it real or was it calculated? Every moment they showed up for you, were they there for you or were they just maintaining access? It's exhausting. It's like taking apart a piece of furniture you've lived with your whole life and realizing it was never actually built right, just balanced well enough that you never noticed until it fell. I spent a long time talking to a therapist about this, about the difference between forgiving someone and allowing them to continue having access to your life, about the fact that forgiveness, if it ever comes, is something you do for yourself. It doesn't require contact, doesn't require reconciliation, doesn't require pretending that what happened didn't reshape everything. I haven't forgiven Ezra. I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll get there someday. Maybe I won't. I've stopped deciding in advance what I'm supposed to feel about someone who tried to profit from my death. What I have done is rebuild. Slowly, carefully. New locks on my apartment. Updated will. New beneficiary designations. Regular check-ins with my attorney. A small, very carefully chosen circle of people who know my full situation, and Tobias, who called my attorney when something felt wrong, who didn't overthink it, who just acted. I made him the executor of my estate. He cried a little when I told him. I cried too. We don't talk about it much, but we both know what it means. Ezra pled guilty to two of the charges, felony forgery and attempted fraud. He's serving time. I don't check how much time is left because it doesn't change anything for me to know. The case is closed in the legal sense. It's still very much open in every other sense, the kind of open that doesn't have a clean endpoint, just a slow, gradual recalibration of who you are and what you're willing to accept and how much you trust your own instincts going forward. My instincts, for what it's worth, were telling me something was wrong for years. I just kept telling them to be polite. I don't do that anymore. I think about Miss Perkins a lot. I sent her a card after everything was resolved. I don't know if that was enough. Probably not. She was just doing her job, she would probably say. But there are people who do their job and people who do their job with their whole attention, who catch the thing that doesn't fit, who ask the question that inconveniences someone, who make the call. She made the call. She didn't have to. She did it anyway. I think about Dr. Reyes flagging that second phone call. I think about the insurance representative who followed protocol instead of just processing the claim. I think about all the small moments where one different decision by one different person could have changed the outcome entirely. And I think about my grandmother's wolf. It doesn't announce itself, it just waits for you to leave the door open. I keep my doors locked now. All of them. I check twice. I don't apologize for it. I don't explain it to people who think I'm being too careful or too cold or too unwilling to let things go. Some doors, once you understand why they need to be closed, you just don't open again. My name is Iris. I'm still here. And that turned out to be exactly the problem my brother couldn't solve. I've thought a lot about what made all of this possible. Not the forgery, not the fraud. Those were just the mechanics. I mean the deeper thing underneath it. The thing that gave Ezra the room to do what he did. It was the fact that I kept choosing comfort over clarity. Every time something felt off, a comment that landed wrong, a question that had no good reason to be asked, a moment where I caught something flickering behind his eyes that I didn't want to name, I chose the easier story. The one where he was just stressed, just struggling, just going through a hard time. I told myself that being a good sister meant extending grace. What I was actually doing was extending cover. That's not wisdom. That's conflict avoidance dressed up as kindness. The hard truth I've had to sit with is that the people who hurt us most are rarely strangers. They're the ones we've given the benefit of the doubt so many times that it stopped being a choice and became a habit. Ezra didn't get to my insurance policy, my spare key, my estate documents. He got to all of that because I handed him the map and told him to make himself at home. I thought I was being generous. He thought he was being efficient. What saved me wasn't luck. It was that a few other people in this story chose clarity over comfort when I couldn't. Dr. Reyes flagged the call. Miss Perkins asked the question that inconvenienced someone. Tobias trusted his instinct that something was wrong and made a phone call instead of talking himself out of it. They didn't overthink it. They didn't wait to be sure. They just acted on what they noticed. That's the thing about paying attention. It requires you to be willing to see what's actually there, not just what you're hoping is there. I wasn't willing for a long time. I am now. I think about who I was before all of this, and I don't fully recognize her. Not because she was naive, exactly. She was smart in a lot of ways, but because she had this quiet, persistent belief that love from family was a fixed thing, that it existed independent of behavior, independent of evidence, independent of what you actually observed with your own eyes over years. That's not love. That's a story you tell yourself because the alternative is too painful to look at directly. Looking at it directly, it turns out, is survivable. It's the not looking that almost wasn't. I rebuilt slowly. New locks, updated documents, a smaller, more honest circle. I stopped explaining myself to people who wanted me to be more forgiving before I was ready. I stopped apologizing for taking my own safety seriously. And I stopped confusing loyalty with blindness. Ezra made his choices. Every step of what he did was a choice, deliberate, calculated, made with full knowledge of what it would cost me. That's on him entirely. But the doors I left open, those were mine to understand and mine to close. I'm still here. I'm still Iris. And the version of me who exists now, the one who checks twice, trusts carefully, and doesn't stay quiet when something feels wrong. She's not colder than the person I was before. She's just finally paying attention.